So like I said, my name is Danielle. I lead Open Homes Hamilton. I'll be providing just a brief summary of the policy implications of Bill C-2, the Strong Borders Act. And then Cindy will be providing the advocacy training portion. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. A moment here. Sorry if you can hear my child in the background. Can you all see that okay?
Yes.
Lovely.
Just coming through. Yeah.
Right. So this workshop was developed by the Christian Reformed Church, which is where Cindy works and I used to work, in collaboration with Open Homes Hamilton. So thank you all for coming. Some of these things you may have heard, if you're a settlement worker yourself, or if you've been reading things in the media, but I'll give just kind of a brief overview of the issues that have been highlighted by various agencies and people in the know, so that can shape our own advocacy. And at the end, we'll come to a set of suggested talking points, which of course, like you're able and free to shape in your own ways. They're more of kind of like a jumping off point for you. So I'm not a policy expert, but this is a summary of what agencies like the Canadian Council for Refugees or OCASI or agencies like that have shared. So one of the big issues with Bill C-2, this Strong Borders Act that is now just in the legislative process, so it's not law yet, is this 1-year bar. And the issue with this is that the proposed bill would make somebody ineligible to make a refugee claim 1 year after their first entry into Canada. And if you've met refugee claimants and you know some people's stories, you probably see quite quickly how that might be an issue, because somebody can enter and be here for a while, maybe on a work permit, maybe on a student visa, whatever it may be, and then the country conditions change, then their family is threatened, then something happens. And so that's very troubling. It's also important to note that this is about their first entry into Canada. So the Canadian Council for Refugees gives the example, maybe somebody visits with their family when they're a baby and then later becomes a human rights defender, even 10, 20 years later, and tries to come here for protection because of an issue, a safety issue they're facing. Under this proposed law, that person would be ineligible because it would be a year after their first entry into Canada. If this 1 year has passed and somebody would like to make a refugee claim, they would be directed and said to what we call the PROP process. Again, I'm not an expert on this process, although there are people on this call who are. So that's the pre-removal risk assessment process. It's not a hearing process. It's not a chance for somebody to prove their story with an oral hearing, which is a right that's enshrined in Canadian law. It's originally intended to protect people from deportation, who were, had gone through different parts of the refugee process or other parts of the immigration process. So it's important to understand that it's not as robust as a refugee hearing. Julie Sand from Amnesty International Canada provided this quote in the Maclean's article. A pre-removal risk assessment is not the same as having your refugee claim heard. You aren't guaranteed an oral hearing. There's no built-in right of appeal. If your PRA is unsuccessful, the only thing you can do is apply to a federal court for judicial review. But CBSA could still deport you in the midst of that. So the PRA system is a lesser system with fewer protections. You're diverted from the process that was specifically designed to hear refugee protection claims into something that was meant to be a last resort. So this 1 year bar would force many people into that process who would otherwise have a strong refugee claim and be able to claim protection here. So obviously that's a big concern. Many of you on the call might know that right to the oral hearing of a refugee claim, the right to go in front of an immigration and refugee board member and make a case for your story, to say that you have a legitimate fear of persecution in your home country, was really enshrined by the Singh decision in 1985. So we just actually celebrated the 40th anniversary of this right being protected in Canadian law. The 1-year bar, based on the experience of the US, where they have something similar, would likely disproportionately impact women fleeing gender-based violence and LGBTQ plus refugees. So another reason to be concerned about this aspect of Bill C-2. I should say too that there will be an opportunity for questions at the end. So you may have questions. Feel free to, pop them in the chat if you want to have a placeholder. There are many people on the call who are more versed in policy than I am. So even if I don't have the answers, somebody likely will. So just to imagine the impact of this, imagine that Solomon comes to Canada under a student visa, but in the second year of his studies, threats are made against his family because of his involvement in a political party in his country of origin before coming to Canada. Maybe he's from Kenya, etc. So he has a credible fear of persecution based on his membership in a political party, but he no longer qualifies to make a refugee claim because the 1-year bar has passed. So somebody like Solomon under Bill C-2 would be directed to the pre-removal risk assessment process, which is not as robust and doesn't have as much recourse if there's a negative decision, like an appeal process. Bill C-2 also gives the government the ability to cancel or suspend immigration status en masse. So that's immigration documents like work permits, study permits, permanent resident visas, if it's deemed to be in the quote unquote public interest, which is of course quite vague language. So that feels a lot like a carte blanche to cancel people's status. And that's troubling, especially, if you're in relationship with people who have gone through that process. I have friends who count down the days till that PR is approved, until that estimated time frame has passed, and just hoping for that PR document. I can't imagine, they've waited all that time, which is their ticket to permanent status here, to potentially bringing their family, to have that revoked with the stroke of a pen would be absolutely devastating. It's not exactly the same as the US situation, but we have seen things like this happen in the US, where temporary protected status for people like Haitians, Nigerians, Venezuelans was all of a sudden canceled en masse. And that's when you saw many people trying to come up across at places like Roxham Road into Canada because they had protected status in the US. They had secure immigration status, and it was just canceled with the stroke of a pen. So that's the kind of situation that Bill C-2 opens the door to. It also further shuts the door to irregular refugee arrivals. So you may remember back when Roxham Road in Quebec was open, people would cross there, and it wasn't an official border point, but they were forced into that by something we call the Safe Third Country Agreement. So an agreement between the US and Canada that keeps many refugees from crossing from the US into Canada. There's a 14-day window currently, and this is where it gets a little more technical. If somebody crosses irregularly, crosses outside of official border points currently, they kind of have to hide for 14 days before presenting their case. Otherwise, they will be sent back. This bill would eliminate that 14-day window and basically entirely shut the door to irregular arrivals, which, as we know from other countries, other situations, when you close doors like that, it doesn't mean people don't come. It just means that they're forced into more dangerous ways of trying to find safety. Maybe they become undocumented. Maybe they have more vulnerable status. It's not a good path to be going down. So again, a story, just an example to kind of illustrate the danger, the kinds of situations that people could be forced into because of some of the stipulations of this bill. So for example, Maria and her family got on the wrong side of paramilitaries in Colombia. They owned a local business and had to pay off rival paramilitary groups for safe passage of their products through a certain area, but something went wrong. Their lives were threatened. They fled first to the southern US, but faced discrimination there and decided to find safety in Canada instead. Since they could not cross at an official border point, they crossed at Roxham Road in Quebec. So this is imagining this happened several years ago, based on people I know cases. Once their refugee case was thoroughly assessed in an oral hearing by the Immigration and Refugee Board, their story was found to be legitimate, and they became protected persons here. If this bill were to pass, people like Maria and her family would not be able to cross in any way. That 14-day window would be closed. Roxham Road is already closed. So you can see how it further removes ways that people could find safety in Canada, which is troubling. I'll mention briefly the privacy and security concerns, which I imagine is not the first thing that brought many of us here, but is also something that people are quite concerned about with Bill C-2. So I have a quote here from the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. Under Bill C-2, public officials, including police, CSIS agents, and others, would be able to demand information from various companies without any judicial oversight and with less proof of suspicion. Yet another part of Bill C-2 would empower the government to issue surveillance capability orders, potentially requiring email providers, virtual private networks, social media companies, laptops and mobile phones, and other digital services to re-engineer their platforms in order to facilitate access to information by CSIS and police agencies. While law enforcement agencies will still need independent authority to access information, the government could force services to be redesigned in ways that significantly expand what data is accessible and the ability to access it without scrutiny. So there are, you can read more of this statement on the Canadian Civil Liberties Association website, but it's not just people serving refugee claimants, serving immigrants who are concerned about the proposed Bill C-2. There are certainly other groups concerned about other aspects of it because it's an omnibus bill. It treats a lot of things at the same time, changes a lot of laws at the same time. Why is this happening? Perhaps unsurprisingly to you, this is about the tariff discussion with the US in part. Capitulation to demands, and also some perceptions in the media that you've probably read around fraudulent refugee claims. You know, people coming as students and then making refugee claims, which is a legitimate part of the process. You know, I know many people who have come in that way and have been proven to be legitimate refugees by the Immigration and Refugee Board. But there is a public perception based on some cases that that is an avenue that has been exploited, which I would argue is very overstated, but I'm sure you've read the same news stories that I have. Where is Bill C-2 in the legislative process? It has gone through first reading, which is the first step. Second reading of the bill, so that's another vote, will likely be in the fall when Parliament is back in session. And from what I've read, it could be late September, because it seems that the government is prioritizing this bill, so it might be earlier in the legislative calendar. So I share that to say this is our moment for advocacy between now and the end of September, to be talking to our MPs, especially when they're in their constituencies, in their ridings. That's a time that we can get their attention. I'll end this policy portion with a quote from the Canadian Council for Refugees. And you can find the entirety of this statement on their website as well. They're a very excellent organization. If you're not familiar with them, definitely look them up. This bill reflects a wholesale shift in how we respond to refugees seeking protection in Canada, appallingly treating them as if they were in the same category as fentanyl or illegal weapons. It introduces US-style militarization and border enforcement, under which migrants are seen as a security threat instead of provided the kind of fair immigration process that Canadians expect. Recent ECOS polling commissioned by CCR showed that 85% of those who voted for this government believe that everyone who comes to our border seeking safety deserves a fair hearing. A right that this bill makes much harder to access, for some, eliminating it fully. So that ends the kind of policy-heavy portion of our time together. And I've written with Cindy some suggested talking points. Again, you can use these as you please. And Cindy will be talking to you a bit more about how we're going to use them, what would be the most effective way to talk about this. So I'll just read them out for you, and you can see them on the screen as well, of course. I oppose Bill C-2 because it undermines our refugee determination system and could lead to the deportation of people into dangerous situations. Because the proposed one-year bar would keep people with valid refugee claims from making a claim for protection. The pre-removal risk assessment system is not a valid alternative. I oppose Bill C-2 because removing the 14-day window and giving government officials the ability to cancel or suspend immigration documents en masse also undermines refugee safety. And finally, refugee lives must not be a political bargaining chip in the tariff dispute with the US. This is not the Canada I believe in. I'll stop my screen share because Cindy is going to be sharing, and I'll hand it off to Cindy, who will equip us to use our knowledge around Bill C-2 and our own stories and experiences to advocate as effectively as possible around this bill. So, Cindy, over to you.
Thanks for that, Danielle. And just so you all know, you're not losing those key points. Danielle's going to cut and paste them into the chat box, so you will have access to them as we move on from here. Because we do hope that those will be some of the things that make it into the letter you're going to be writing tonight, because surprise, y'all are writing letters tonight. That is going to be our first step towards doing some advocacy together. Another thing we'll quickly say is that letters are great, but what's really effective is meeting in person with your elected officials. So Danielle is going to talk to us at the end of this session about ways in which you can participate with us. Or if you're not in Hamilton area, you can be equipped to connect with your local elected officials in person. Booking an in-person meeting is incredibly effective and one of the best ways to get your perspective and your message heard. So everything we're going to talk about today is leading up to that. Sending letters is great, especially if we all send a letter. If there's 17 people on this call, there's 35 people who signed up for this workshop. So if all 17, all 35 send it, then that is going to be pretty fantastic. So we will get started. Now I'm going to share my screen. And I will start by letting you all know that this content is from a online workshop that exists through the website of the denomination I work for through the CRC's website. So you don't only have access to this information tonight. We're going to send you the link to this online course so you can have access to this long after tonight's session. You can go through this at your own pace if you feel like tonight was way too much of a whirlwind and you just need to like slow down and do it one step at a time. You can actually take this back to your own family, your community, your church, whoever, and, you know, bring up the course online and do it together so that you and 12 of your closest friends can write a letter together or plan an in-person meeting together. So I really encourage you, this should not be the only time that you use this resource, and you will have access to it long after tonight. So we're going to get started just with a little perspective on like, why do we do advocacy? A number of us here on the call tonight are people of faith. I don't want to assume everyone is, but this workshop was developed from that perspective, from the idea that we are called to be allies and to speak up as advocates for justice and mercy. So we're going to start with just a little conversation about why we do that and how that can be part of the spiritual disciplines that we practice. So I'm very sorry. I'm going to play a video that I am in. That's very awkward to like be on the call and then play a video of myself and my colleague Mike. But it's just a way better way of telling the story than me trying to ad-lib it. So I'm going to play this video. Please let me know if you can't hear it. I want to actually, you know what? Let me make sure that I'm sharing sound. Sharing sound.
One of the things our church has named as a calling is to seek God's justice and peace in every area of life. And this is a biblical call to act justly and to love mercy as we walk humbly with God, as it talks about in the book of Micah. Now, this means that caring for creation and loving our neighbors across the street or across the world, this is a sacred and practical work. And one of the ways that we can demonstrate this kind of love and care is through advocacy for justice and reconciliation.
And advocacy is a practice of bearing witness. Sometimes it's said that seeking justice is being a voice for the voiceless. But it's important to remember that no one is voiceless if we take the time to listen. So, an important part of advocacy is becoming aware of justice challenges and then building relationships with those who are affected by them. In those relationships, we can come alongside and bear witness to justice together.
As we practice these things, we begin to develop advocacy as a spiritual discipline. Just like other disciplines of prayer or worship, advocacy is a sacred practice of loving neighbors that we can cultivate and grow into something that becomes an everyday part of our spiritual lives. In the words of Dr. Cornel West, we must remember to never forget that justice is what love looks like in public, and that advocating for justice in communities, this is a very important way that we demonstrate the love of God.
Thanks for that, friends. So again, just to summarize that, when we do advocacy, there are many different ways that we are echoing the biblical call to speak up alongside those who are impacted by injustice, alongside those who have experienced hardship, or even for those who have that lived experience themselves, for us to be part of elevating that voice. That is a huge part of what we can do in our faith walk. But the idea of thinking of it as a spiritual discipline, I really hope that that can get through to folks. And this idea that, you know, it's something that we practice, we cultivate it. It's like exercising a muscle. You know, we get stronger the longer we exercise it. We get more confident the longer we do it. And I hope that tonight is the beginning for some of you of exercising that muscle. I know some of you have been exercising it a long time. And this is just one of your many ways of doing that. But yeah, thinking about advocacy as something that we practice, something that we can participate in our communities for the betterment of those communities and to demonstrate the love of God is just a huge part of why we do this. We're not going to watch that video because we don't have time. I'm going to share a little bit too about why we provide advocacy training. Some people wonder like, oh, can't I just write a letter? Well, sure you can, and we would love you to, but we'd love to give you a couple of these pointers on how to do that. Number one, the reason why we provide advocacy training is because elected officials actually want to hear from you. I think a lot of people think that politicians are all crooked and they're all in it for the glory or whatever. But most politicians I've experienced, especially local MPs, local city councilors, these people want to actually do what's best for their communities. They believe in the common good of the communities that they live in and play in and work in. And they got into these roles because they thought they could make a difference. And so they want to hear how they should do that. And also, it is their job to represent what their constituency cares about. So it's not just their job to like meet with developers to build condos. It's their job to respond to what people in their communities deeply care about. And you might actually have the ability to educate them on something they might not know as much about. The people on this call, I know some of you have been volunteering or working within the world of being allies or those with the lived experience of being new to Canada or refugees experiences yourselves. You have so much knowledge that you can share with elected officials that they might not encounter in their day-to-day work. And so you could actually share, help to educate them on something that is important for them to know about. The other thing to point out is that advocacy really does make a difference. Again, a lot of people think like, what's the point of sending a letter? We never hear back. Maybe that's just one letter, but if everybody sends a letter, if everyone speaks up, we're hearing this groundswell of opposition to Bill C-2 from many corners of society. And that raising of voices, that raising of concern is going to make a difference, and it's going to impact those who are making decisions when they are reading, when Danielle talks about a first reading, second reading, that literally means they read the legislation through and they debate about it in the House of Commons. They question it. They ask, is this really just? Is this really the right thing to do? And sometimes when they're asking those questions, it's because someone in their local constituency told them a story of how that bill could mess up their lives or the lives of their friends. And so it's important to bring these stories to them so that they understand the difference that their vote makes and the difference that their pushback will make to this legislation. Advocacy as well is a long-term commitment. Again, for those of you here tonight, I hope this isn't the only time you want to advocate. We often joke that advocacy is kind of like dating, that you want to have a long-term commitment with your MP or your representatives, because we want them to hear from you more than once. We want you to be persistent. We want you to pick up the phone, send a letter, go in person to meet with them whenever something comes up that concerns you, that addresses a justice issue that matters to you. Maybe the next time it won't be about immigration. Maybe the next time it'll be about climate. Maybe the next time it'll be about Indigenous rights. But we want you to, have their phone number and programmed into your phone. We want them to know, oh, those people from that church are back to talk to me about that thing again. And it's important for them to realize that people in their community care about this stuff and are going to be consistent and persistent with them. And now on that note, those people from the church down the road, another thing to remember is that unfortunately, faith communities have not always been respectful in their communications with elected officials. I've heard from many elected officials who have, had a group come in and say, you're going to go to hell if you vote for this, or you are sinning if you do this. And bringing that voice of anger and judgment and is just not our place. We can bring certainly challenge, we can bring truth, we can bring stories that challenge the status quo, but to bring negativity is really not what our witness is meant to be as Christians, and honestly can influence elected officials in the opposite way than what we hope they would. They might say, well, like those people down the road are crazy, and so I'm certainly not going to vote that way because I can't align myself with them. So as this quote is here from the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, it's so important that when we share our concerns with elected officials that we do it with grace and love, and that we're doing it in a way that allows them to see that that church down the road is full of reasonable people who deeply care about refugees, who deeply care about the issue that they're bringing to them, and they're going to do it in a way that is respectful and thoughtful and upholding the voices of those who are being impacted. So we're going to get started. As you'll see, I'm skipping through this work, this online course, just because there are parts of it that have already been touched. by Danielle. And there are, this workshop itself, if we did it in person, would take about 4 hours. So we don't want to keep you here that long tonight. So we're just going to power through this. But again, remember, you can come back to this anytime. So right now is the part normally where if we didn't have the wonderful Danielle here on the line to do our research for us and to provide a wonderful 20-minute presentation on all of the concerns in Bill C-2 and to give us 4 amazing bullet points on what our message should be, normally this is the time when you would actually go and be researching your topic, taking the time, taking a few hours, taking a week, taking longer, to really get to know the topic itself. And you can still do that. We certainly recommend going to read that Maclean's article, going to read the CCR website, but we're going to jump past that today. And just start with the very most important point is, who are we actually advocating to? Which elected official are we addressing our advocacy to? And in this case, we can kind of tell you that because we already know who you should be talking to in this, but we want to help you learn this skill. So it's important to ask yourself, is this a justice issue that's municipal, provincial, or federal? And if you're not sure, you would ask yourself, is this something that impacts my local town, my city or region? Like maybe it's a city bylaw. Is it a provincial issue? Is it something to do with the provincial government, like education or healthcare? Or is it a federal issue? It's something that's nationwide. And in this case, again, not everyone on the street would know that talking about this particular bill is federal, but because it's a bill that's in front of the federal government, it's happening in Ottawa, we can let you know this is a federal issue. So you are most likely to want to reach out to the Federal Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. That is Lena Diab. We'll put her stuff and contact info in the chat box as we go through today. But it's also important to connect with your local federal official. So yes, absolutely target your message at the person who's in charge, at the boss, basically. But there's also a local MP who represents your jurisdiction. There's someone who represents me here in the center of Hamilton. There's someone who represents those who are here from Edmonton tonight. There are those who represent, Dina over in BC where you are. And so it's important to know who your local MP is. Hopefully, it's someone that you voted for or maybe didn't vote for, but you're aware of who they are in your local constituency. So if you're not sure of who that is, we recommend going to ourcommons.ca to look up. You can literally just put in your postal code and it'll tell you who your MP is for your area. Because we're going to encourage you, we're going to send this letter that we're writing tonight to the boss, but we're also going to CC it to the person in your local area so they know they've sent this message on to the boss and people in my local constituency care about it. Because it matters that our local MP here in Hamilton sees that 17 people tonight care about this issue, or however many are from this region, right? They need to know that people in their area are speaking up about this. So in our first break, I'm going to go and grab Lena Diab's information and I'll put it in the chat box. But in the meantime, I encourage you to just copy this, ourcommons.ca, or write it down so that you can look up who your MP is. Maybe you know who they are, but you need to get their email address. Everything's going to be listed there. So that is the first thing that we need to do tonight. We're going to quickly move in now into what it actually looks like to create a message that you're going to send to your elected official. This is the part where it's important to have a document open or a, sorry, wrong thing, to have a Word doc open or to have a journal open so you can literally like write down your message as you're going to work on it tonight. So I'll give people like 20 seconds to go make sure you have that open in like another tab on your computer, or that you have that with you. And then we're going to get started on exactly what your key message could be. And again, Danielle has put in the chat box, she has put the 4 bullet points there. You could also copy that out of the chat box and paste it at the top of the document you're working on, because these will be really great bullet points to work from as we create this next key message. So To communicate with your elected official, you basically need two things. You need to know what your elected official needs to know about the issue. They need to basically know what the problem is, right? Like, what is this thing that you're communicating to them about? So that's what we're going to answer with this key message here in this next activity. After that, it's important, we're going to do another activity in about 20 minutes about what your call to action is. What is it that you want your elected official to do about the problem? So you're going to identify what the problem is. You're going to tell them what you want them to do about it. Then you're going to say thank you and sign your letter. And then you will be done, basically, with a few other little, important points thrown in. But to really get started, we need to identify what the problem is. Now, thankfully, Diane, someone here is named Diane, Danielle, thankfully, Danielle has pointed all of that out to us. And I'm sure many of you've been reading your newspapers, you've been watching the news, you're aware of some of these problems as well, and that's part of why you're here. So we fully understand that Bill C-2 is a problem because it undermines the refugee determination system, because the one-year ban, keeps people from having the well-established protections that refugees need to have, that suspending immigration documents en masse is absolutely crazy. You don't need to write that in your letter, but it takes away the very deep right that each refugee has to have their own case heard and to have it determined based on their unique situation and the story that they have. And again, the problem is that Canada's place as a country that welcomes those who are fleeing violence and persecution, that has nothing to do with tariffs. That has nothing to do with the current back and forth with the US. And it is not fair to make that a bargaining chip. So those are some of the problems that we have established. You might have other problems in your mind too that you're aware of based on what you've been reading and learning about. The next question is, why do you care? We all see that these are problems, but why do we care about that? The average person walking down the street might not even know what BC-2 is. So why do you care? Why did you show up here tonight? Maybe you have a particular story about a refugee family or a friend. Maybe you have a personal lived experience. Maybe you think that it is absolutely ridiculous that the government is considering doing this, considering the hard work that many people have done for decades to establish many of these rights that people have to a fair hearing in Canada. So it's important to make it personal. So at first, you're going to say like one of these bullet points or your own personalized take on it. But then you need to basically write a paragraph on why does it matter to you? Maybe you have a very personal connection. Maybe you have a very theoretical or theological connection, whatever it is. There has to be a reason why you care about this. And then what is the solution? Now, this is a difficult part because not all of us are experts in legislation. Not all of us know everything about the way that these policies are put together. But you don't have to be an expert to say that a solution is repeal BC-2 or maybe to adjust parts of this bill to ensure that, for example, the one-year bar doesn't go through, or that the ability to cancel documentations en masse doesn't go through. There can be very specific things that you say shouldn't happen, and that can be the solution. That can be the difference that is made through your suggestion. The other thing is that you don't have to know what the solution is because you're not the MP of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship. So you can simply say that you oppose this and that those who are experts in this need to find a better solution. It is absolutely legitimate to say that this is wrong and shouldn't happen, and to challenge those whose job it is to do better, to do better. So it is totally fine if you feel like, I don't know what the solution actually is. You're welcome to challenge people in your letter and say, it needs to be different, it needs to be better than it is. We'll get to another point where sometimes the solution is in actually asking your elected officials for more information. Sometimes they can help you understand why a legislation is happening in a certain way. But that's a little bit more for in-person meetings. In a letter, it's a little bit more important to just sort of state your challenges and push that through. So we're going to go through right now in the next, let me see, I'm going to say about 8 or 9 minutes. I'm going to give all of you a chance to literally, like, you can turn off your camera if you don't want people to see you typing, to go to your Word doc or to go to your journal or whatever you're writing. You can use these bullet points that Danielle's already provided, but I want you to write out the answer to these 3 questions, the 3 W's. What's the problem? Why do you care? What is the solution? And I encourage you not to focus on all 4 of these bullet points because it could take you an hour to talk about all of those things. I encourage you to pick one of those um, to specifically say this is what the problem is and expand on that and why you care about that and what the solution is. You absolutely can tag on some of these other bullet points in the conclusion of your letter. But I encourage you to pull out a bullet point, expand on it, share your own personal story about why you care about it. And we're going to take until about 8:25 to really pull this out and get you to write it articulately. So open up your doc. I'm going to go to this workbook part of the presentation and write out what is the problem, why do you care, and what is the solution? And I'm going to sort of slowly go through these as we're sitting here so you can kind of look up and see what some of the prompts are. And you can ignore that I wrote my own name in here. And yeah, so go and literally write out the answer to the questions. What is the problem? Why do you care? What is the solution? We'll be back at 8:25, and we're going to ask some of you to share the messages that you developed. So please do it so that you can share it. And we'll see you back here at 8:25. I'll also just quickly note, if someone has questions, if we could just leave them to the end, because that really confuses everyone when they're trying to work on their thing if someone's talking on the Zoom call while they're trying to work on their letter. So you can mute yourselves, you can turn off your camera, and we'll see you back here in a few minutes. I'm just going to quickly jump on here and say, if you are still stuck on the first question, we've got 2 minutes left to move on to the next two. What is the problem? Why do you care? What is the solution? Take your last 2 minutes to make sure you round it out by finishing the last two questions. I'm going to give everyone about 30 more seconds, so finish up your sentences or paragraphs if you can. Okay, so pencils down, typing fingers down. We're going to go through this section and hopefully hear back from a few folks who have come up with their own personalized answer to the 3 W's. What is the problem? Why do you care? What is the solution? Even if you didn't quite finish it this time around, you can always go back and finish it later tonight, or maybe sleep on it and finish it tomorrow. So I'd love to hear from maybe 1 or 2 people who completed your 3 answers to this. You can either just say it out loud by unmuting, or if you're shy and you don't want to say it out loud, you can put it in the chat box and Danielle will read it out for us. So I'd love to hear from a couple folks on what you came up with.
I can share.
Great, thanks, Gloria.
Okay, so it's really short and I'll need to work on it, but it's a start.
Good.
What is the problem? I just actually used one of the sentences that you guys gave. I oppose Bill C-2 because it undermines our refugee determination system and could lead to the deportation of people into dangerous situations. Refugees' lives are not bargaining chips in the tariff war with the US. Every life matters. Every person has the right to be safe. What if it was your family who had no safe place in the world to be except Canada, and now that safety could potentially be at risk if this bill is passed? We have a decent, not perfect, system already in place that is respected internationally. Why not work towards making this system more efficient and effective?
That's fantastic. Thank you, Gloria. Is there a hand clap emoji to put up there? I love the solution too. Like, don't break what already works well. Let's support what already works well and make it better rather than changing a system that we know, again, like you said, is not perfect, but certainly doesn't need to be like drastically different in the other direction. Thanks for that. Does someone else want to share? Even if it sounds very similar?
I would like to share.
Thanks. Go ahead, Ephraim.
there. Okay. Okay. So the proposed 1 year bar would keep people with valid refugee claim from making a claim for protection, and the pre-removal risk assessment will not be valid alternative. So what's the problem? I think it will make people eligible for who have been previously in Canada, maybe with visitor visa, with anything, and but for some reason they needed a protection for their life, where they have to flee their country. Now they don't have a place to go, and and the question also goes to, why do you care? I think one of the reason is families might with if this bill pass, and with PRA, which is pre-risk removal assessment. As far as I know, I think only bloodline family relative can apply, so be eligible for that, and sometimes families might break apart, and a husband and a wife might not be included. Yeah. Thank
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. It's always so good to hear everyone's different perspectives and their own understandings, because it helps enhance what we all know and understand as well. So thank you so much for that. So we're going to move on because we have limited time here tonight. So we're going to move on to the 3 H's, to the call to action.
Elected official.
We're not going to listen to my talking head this time. Not this talking head. So essentially, the 3 W's, what you just answered, were like the top of the sandwich. The 3 H's, the call to action, are going to be the bottom of the sandwich of your letter. And by the time we're done here tonight, you should have a pretty decent sandwich of a letter to send, if that makes any sense. So now we're going to ask ourselves 3 more questions, and they all start with H because we like things to follow patterns here. So the call to action is going to outline what you want your elected official to do about your issue. So what you just did, your key message is, what's the problem? This is what I'm concerned about. Now you're saying, hey, elected official, this is what you should do about what I'm concerned about. So you might want to ask yourself the first question, how does your issue matter to your elected official? So perhaps there are people in their local constituency. I can't think of a single place in Canada that isn't impacted by newly arrived refugees. So this matters to them because there are people in their communities that are impacted by this. It matters to them because you care about it and you're in their community. It matters because they were elected to uphold a fair and just system here in Canada, and it's important for them to continue to do that and ensure that we continue to enshrine the human rights that we always have. So there are many different ways that you can tell your elected official that this issue should matter to them. Now, how can they take action? You can basically say, they can oppose Bill C-2, or they can oppose these specific parts of it about the 1-year ban, the cancellation of immigration documents, specific things like that. You can get into that. But basically, you're saying, what do I want you to do for me, elected official, person who I may or may not have voted for? This is how I want you to represent me in Parliament. So you can tell them how you want them to vote, how you want them to debate, how to ask questions, to push back on the way that this legislation is going forward. You can tell them what you want them to do on your behalf. And then the final question here is, how can they help you? So this is what I was talking about before. Sometimes when we don't fully understand why a legislation has gone through, or the intricacies of some of the stuff that happens in Parliament that, let's be honest, even I don't always understand, sometimes they can help you understand a bit more. Maybe you can ask, hey, why did refugees get thrown in as a bargaining chip when we're trying to oppose tariffs? Why is that that's a rhetorical question, but that's not a legitimate thing to do in the way in which we talk about having a strong border. You know what? Having a strong border is a good thing if it's done in ways that are fair and just. So why is this area of injustice infiltrating into the way in which we're wanting to push through this bill? Understandably, elected officials are concerned about our relationship with the US right now. They're concerned about the way in which we are being challenged to have a strong border, but that does not necessarily mean that we go backwards in the rights that have been enshrined for people coming to Canada seeking safety. But you can ask them questions. You can say, give me clarity on why this decision was made. Give me some more understanding about this. And they should respond to you. If you ask a direct pointed question, you should be able to expect that they or one of their staffers will answer you. So I'm going to go to the next sort of how we have this laid out with a few more questions. I love my stupid answers. So how does this issue matter to your elected officials? How does it impact the local people in the community they represent? How should they respond as a person who represents those people? And then when you say, how can they take action? Be clear. Do you want them to introduce a new law or oppose or change the existing one? Do you want them to influence their peers to support a different position? Maybe, you want to talk to your own local MP as you're copying them on your email and say, hey, you are from a different political party than the one that's in control right now. What is your opposition party doing to make Canada a safer place for newcomers? Sometimes what we want them to do is talk about funding. That's not so much what we're talking about today, but certainly there could be more funding put towards this, as Gloria mentioned in her solution. Why change a system that could be functioning better if we gave it more attention? Do we want them to investigate a specific unjust issue? Specifically, maybe we want them to look deeper into this one-year ban. Why are we proposing that? That's a particularly unjust area. That's something that they need to give more attention to. Do we want them to amplify the voices of those who are directly impacted? Do you have a story of somebody who has been impacted by these things and their permission to share it, of course? Is there someone who is a friend of yours or who you've been an ally to or your own experience that you can share saying this is what can happen if we do not follow proper policy? So that is what we can ask them to make a difference. And then how can they help you? Can they answer questions? Can they help you understand the system better? Or can they refer you to other elected officials who can act on the issue? So sometimes, we reach out to the wrong person and they say, actually, you need to talk to this other person. Now, again, right now, we're pretty sure that Lena Diab, the Minister for Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship, is the right person in this case. But when you're doing this on your own, you might not be sure. You might go to your local MP here in Hamilton or Edmonton or wherever you are, and they might say, hey, that's a great question. I can't answer it for you, but I know who can, and they can put you in touch with the right person. So right now, I'm going to encourage us to take about 5 minutes because we're running out of time. So take about 5 minutes to answer the three
Elected
H's.
official. How is this something that matters?
Me again. How does this issue matter to your elected official? How can they take action? And if there's a way they can help you, if you have a question, you can answer that as well. But I would say focus on the first two. How does this matter? Why should they care? And how can they take action? What can they do to support your perspective in opposing Bill C-2? Honestly, it might be as simple as saying, this should matter to you because I'm your constituent and there are refugees who live in your constituency. You should take action by opposing Bill C-2 in the second reading. Like you can be that very clear, but some of you are way more nuanced than me. So we're going to take about 5 minutes and write our own responses to these two questions that will give us a call to action. What is it that you want your elected official? What do we want Lena Diab to do differently right now? So we're going to go until 8:42. So you can turn off your video, get writing, and then we'll invite somebody to share when we get back. I'll give you your 1-minute warning. You're needing to wrap up your sentences. Got 1 minute. Okay. So I'm going to invite folks back. Again, you can keep working on this if you want to fine tune it and edit it and make it perfect. But I would love to hear, as there are one or two of you that want to share what your key message was, or sorry, what your call to action was. How does your issue matter to your elected official, and how can they take action on your behalf? What sentences or paragraphs did you come up with?
Bart, if you're trying to share, you're muted. Are you speaking up?
Just asking Alice, who's sitting beside me, what was the question again that they wanted to share?
How does your issue matter to your elected official? How can
So
they
how does it matter? Why should your elected official care about this?
Yeah, well, okay, since I'm talking now, so
Go ahead.
all right, I could give you my little line or paragraph.
Mhm.
So yeah, first, just before I explain why I care, about this issue, and then I follow that up with, this should matter to you because there are refugee claimants and newcomers in your riding who will be directly affected in a negative way by Bill C-2 if it is passed. Moreover, there are many others who care deeply about the plight of refugees.
That's good. It can be that simple. And is there anyone who sort of articulated how you want your elected official to take action? What do you want Lena Diab to do differently? What do you want? I'm in Hamilton, so oh my gosh. I don't know if I remember the name of my new MP. Aslam Rana? Yeah. I was gonna say Matt Green, but well, I'd like them both to think differently on this issue, so why not? Is there anybody who has a call to action to your elected official? What do you want your elected official to do differently about Bill C-2?
I wrote that I would encourage them to, or I'm asking them to oppose the bill and encourage more focus on the already existing systems.
Again, that's great and a wonderful direction to give them. Again, if it ain't broke, it's just a little broke. It can be repaired. It doesn't have to be completely overhauled. Thanks for that. Okay, so we're gonna move on. Speed us right through here. So first of all, congratulations. With the key message that you created by saying what the problem is, what the solution is, and making your call to action, what you want your elected official to do about this, you have, again, like I said, that sandwich, the top and the bottom of your sandwich. And then the good part in the inside, that's your personal story. That's you saying why you care about this. So these are what you've just done already is the foundation of what you're going to use to contact your elected officials. So right here, I'm going to skip to the writing letters section. Now, this is almost too big to be seen on our screen, but this is the template of a letter that I wrote a few years ago. Now, this is particularly about COVID. We don't need to, write about that at the moment. But this should give you a sense of what your letter should look like. So at the top, if you're going to make this as a PDF or something, or a written out letter that you're sending, you can also just send it as an email, and then you don't need to do all this like fancy stuff at the top. But essentially, put your address at the top. You put who you're addressing and the date you're sending it after there at the next part of the letter. You write, Dear Minister Green or Dear Minister Diab, whoever you're sending it to. You start out with your key message. What do you want to see change? So you say, what's the problem and what you think, a really quick little like blurb on what the solution could be. Then their next paragraph is making it personal. This matters to me because I live in this riding, because one of my best friends would have been turned away from Canada if this were, Bill C-2 were in place. This matters to me because I've been part of a refugee sponsorship team for 20 years, and half of the people that we have welcomed to Canada wouldn't have been allowed to come because of this bill if it were in place, or whatever the imaginary, thing is that I'm throwing out here. Your personal story, your reason why you care deeply about this is sort of the good center of that sandwich. So you start the key message that you've already written, most of you tonight, right? You make it personal in your second paragraph. Your third paragraph, you do your call to action. What is it you want your elected official to do about it? What do you want them to oppose Bill C-2? Do you want them, like Gloria said, to instead move their focus towards the system that already exists and improving it rather than dismantling it? What do you want them to do? That's your third paragraph. Your final paragraph, you can say something nice. Thank you for the good work you've done in our community. Thank you for being a champion of what is good and just, hopefully. And then reiterate your final, one sentence thing that you're asking them. Do you want them to reply to a question that you've asked? Do you want them to, again, reiterate that you want them to oppose Bill C-2, whatever that is? So we're going to send you a PDF of this letter just so that you can see it as a template, so you don't have to sort of remember what you saw here today. But essentially, you've already written most of this in what you have on your Word doc in front of you, or what you have in what you've been scribbling down. You have the key message, you have why it matters to you, you have your call to action. You can massage this a little bit, edit it till it's, the way that you want it, but you could probably hit send on this tonight, right? Or tomorrow once we send you Lena Diab's email address. This should be this simple. I know that sometimes we get quite overwhelmed in trying to connect with elected officials and think that it's such a big thing and why would they even want to hear from me? But it is as simple as taking an hour and a half of your time on a Tuesday night, writing a letter and hitting send, and letting that be the beginning of your relationship with these elected officials. Nope, we're not going to do that one. It's just a couple of very quick tips as you're getting ready to send your letter. It's important to ask yourself, like, is it ready? Like, literally, are you fantastic at writing and you could literally hit send as you close your Zoom call? Or do you want to take a little bit more time to work on it tonight or tomorrow? But we encourage you to really commit to getting it sent so that we can say, hey, this many people from the Open Homes webinar tonight sent a letter. Here are a few tips to start. If you know that your elected official has done some positive things on your issue, if you've read a news article about Lena Diab and you want to congratulate her on a great thing that she has done, that's a great place to start. Or if you're copying it to your local MP, if you know that your local MP, I remember seeing my local MP at a community event for women's rights, and he was folding chairs and tearing down tables at the end of the event. And the first time that I met with him in person, I said, I remember you were there and I remember you were doing that. And thank you for like actually showing up and not just making a speech, but actually getting your hands dirty. So some of those things are important to acknowledge when you're talking to your elected officials. This is not really the case because hopefully Lena Diab is very familiar with immigration issues, but if your elected official isn't, you can give them a little bit more briefing on the topic. You could send them some of the notes that Danielle shared. It's important to close your letter and thank them. And if you want a response, if you're saying, I want to hear from you in the next month or something, you want to hear from them about how they're going to be engaging with Bill C-2 by the end of September to say that, so that they have a timeline by which you're wanting to hear back from them. Another important thing to note, you are probably not going to get an answer from Lena Diab. I'm sorry. Unless you are like the head of it, like the Canadian Council for Refugees, I don't know if Lena Diab is going to write you a personal letter back, but you're probably going to hear from a staff assistant. Even your own local member of parliament may not actually, your message might not get directly to them, which is why we always encourage people to meet in person. But it's quite likely that a staff assistant is going to respond to you. Don't feel like that means your message wasn't heard. In fact, most MPs' offices, most ministers' offices have staff who are dedicated to specific issues. I know that the staff here in Hamilton, there are particularly people in those offices who are more experts in immigration policy than the MP themselves are. So it's actually good to hear back from them because they're the person who has that experience and they're dedicated to that work. So don't feel like you have failed at advocacy if you hear back from a staff assistant and not directly from the minister themselves. And again, if you are intending to get a response from them, it's important to follow up. In all honesty, in all of the advocacy letters I've sent over the years, I've only gotten a few responses, and most of them are only responses when I've asked a direct question or asked for a specific response. So it's important that if you want them to answer you, to state that in your letter, because they get thousands of letters a week. So it's important to state that if you want a particular response. Another important thing to note, some people ask, is it better to email it or put it in the mail? In my experience, it hasn't made a difference. In fact, it's probably easier in today's age for a staffer to hit reply on an email than it is for them to actually type up a response to a physical letter put in the mail. But if you are going to put it in the mail, remember, you don't have to put a stamp on it because Canada Post is owned by the government. And so they can send it to Parliament on your behalf. So what I would encourage everyone to do is to write down the date that when you expect to finish your letter. Is it tonight? Is it tomorrow? Is it by the end of this week? I would encourage everybody here tonight to sort of make a commitment right now in your head. When do you want to finish the letter and send it? And we also really want to hear from you if you send the letter, because we want, both me and my work, I like to know that what I did mattered. But I also know that Open Homes wants to hear whether or not a bunch of letters went out about this particular topic. So if you send a letter, can you please let Danielle know? Send her, you don't have to send it to her if you're embarrassed. You can. Danielle's always happy to read people's advocacy letters, as am I. But even just sending her a note that says, I actually sent it and on this date. And if you get a response from your elected official, we always love to hear that too. So we encourage you, just make your own personal commitment, even if it's just to yourself, or maybe you're going to write it down. When are you going to send that letter by? And then let us know if you do. Now, we are going to send you a follow-up email with the contact information needed, Lena Diab's contact info, how to find out who your local MP is, a connection, a link to this course that we've just been going through, and all the other resources you need. So some of you might be feeling like, ooh, I'm not ready to write it until I get all of that. That's fine too. But we really want to hear from you, and we really want to see this happen. So Danielle, I'm going to pass it off to you for the last 5 minutes. I know we have one other challenge we're calling people to. And then we'll stick around for some questions if people have them.
Can I just ask Cindy, while I'm sharing my screen, Bart had asked a question in the chat. Maybe you could address that while I get my screen set up.
Oh, sure. Bart, yeah, you can do that too. What I would actually recommend is sending the same letter to both of them and just copying both of them so they know that like, for example, that your local MP knows that you've copied Lena Diab and vice versa, that if that makes sense. Like when I usually do it, I send the email with everyone copied, but I usually address it to the primary person. So addressing it to Lena Diab. If you want to send, like, slightly make changes to the two letters and send a slightly different letter to Lena Diab than you're sending to your local MP, that might make sense. For example, if your local MP is from a different political party than the current party in power, sometimes that makes sense because they're coming from a different perspective, or you might already have a relationship with your local MP and have particular things you want to communicate to them. So it's absolutely fine if you want to do that in either direction. But yeah, it's also absolutely fine to send two slightly different letters if you want to, but copy both so they know that it's being sent.
Thanks, Cindy, and thanks for that question, Bart. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this. Again, I know there were others who are interested in receiving the recording. So we represent just a part of this community that is now better equipped for advocacy on Bill C-2, which for me is very encouraging. We are going to try to set up a meeting or two in Hamilton for people here. If you're interested in meeting with your member of parliament, please do say me in the chat, or, you know, when I send out the resources tomorrow, you could also respond. I would love to be part of setting you up with your MP for an impactful conversation on this, because as Cindy said, it's just taking it that next step further. If you are here from another community, I know there's Torontonians and people in Peterborough, London on this call or watching the recording. You can also let me know. And if I hear from multiple people, then I'll try to connect you. Otherwise, there are a lot of great resources on this topic, a lot of people all over who are advocating on this. And so I think you will be able to find somebody in your area who's interested in accompanying you, whether it's by contacting your local refugee house, who's probably keyed in on this, or some other local organization. Yeah, thanks again for being part of Standing Up for Canada, as welcoming as we are. And I look forward to seeing your notes that you advocated, that you sent your letter, and your responses about meeting with your MP. In fact, that could be your ask in the letter, right? Is I would love to meet with you. And then it takes some persistence to follow up on that ask to actually get the meeting, but it is very possible, very it's not a pipe dream. You can meet with your MP, and they are there to do that.
Yeah.
So that's what I'll say in closing. Cindy, did you have any last thoughts?
No, just thanks everyone for being here. Again, we'll send you the link to this online course. We'll send you other resources to help you in getting your letters sent. And again, just so you know, the rest of this course gives step-by-step guides to how to prepare for an in-person meeting with your elected official. So don't feel like, you know, we're challenging you to do that and leaving you with no resources. The other half of this workshop is for that. So if we can get a group of people here to sort of commit to being part of a local delegation in Hamilton, we'll do the other half of it with you in person so that you feel prepared to go. And we'll also support, if you're not from Hamilton, we'll support you from afar in doing that, because we want to see as many in-person meetings happen as possible, because that really makes a difference. Like, some MPs have told us that as many as just 5 or 6 different groups meeting with them on the same topic makes them realize, like, oh, my community really cares about this. I need to pay attention. So we would love to see that happen. So watch out for that email and let us know about your letters.